Hello, how you doing? It's Phil Thatch, and today I'm going to be looking at a really cool product from Viltrox. It's their new E to Z adapter, and just like the product name says, it adapts E lenses to Z cameras. So that's really cool. Now there's other E to Z adapters on the market, but most of them are about $250. This one is going to be priced at $99 US. So at that price, I had to give it a shot. Inside the box is the adapter itself, which is just amazingly thin. You know, the Nikon Z mount, not only is it the largest of the mounts, it also is the closest, the mount is the closest to the sensor. And because of that, because the E mount is a little further away from the sensor than a Nikon one is, you can squeeze an adapter in there. The mechanical part of it is not that amazing to me. The electronic part really is. The adapter makes it where you can control and use autofocus on a Sony lens on your Nikon Z mount camera. Also in the box is a USB cable that plugs into a Type A USB port on one side, and the other side has this unusual proprietary connector. This connects to the inside of the adapter, and with it you can do firmware updates if needed for compatibility in the future. There are two red dots on this to help you with lining up your lenses. The red dot on the inside is where you line up the dot on your Sony lens to attach to it. The red dot on the outside is where you line up the adapter to go on your Nikon camera. So let's try that. Red dot. Goes right on. Now the adapter is on my Z50. And this is a Sigma lens, but it's a Sigma lens for Sony cameras. There's its white dot. And there's the red dot to line this up. Clicks right into place. Now later in the video, I'm going to show you a video test that I did using the Z50 and this Sigma lens, but mostly what I tested was my Nikon Z8. There's a push button right here to release the Sony style lens. This is what I tested the most. I tested the Sony 200 to 600 on my Nikon Z8, which I would think would be a pretty difficult test, this big super telephoto lens on the adapter. So the first thing I did was I went out to my back porch blind, which if you watch the channel very often, I'm sure you've seen that. And I spent just 30 or 45 minutes out there and just to see if it would focus on birds that came up and landed on my perches. And to my surprise, it would focus on birds that landed on my perches. Now, one thing, it seems like when you first flip on the camera, the lens would focus out to infinity. And in the blind, my perches are about 10 feet away, and the camera didn't know what to do. So I just kind of adjusted I would manually adjust the lens to where it was closer to the correct place. And once I got pretty close, it would focus right on my perches. And more impressively, when a bird came up and landed, it would focus right on the bird's eye, just like I had a native lens on. I was really impressed with that. Let's take a look at some of the results of that right now. Here's the first shot I made with the adapter, and it's a northern mockingbird right there on my back porch, 450 millimeters, 1/1250th of a second, f7.1 and ISO 500. Here's the next shot. It's a female red-bellied woodpecker, and I thought I would show you what the exit data looks like out of the adapter. It shows the 200 to 600 Sony lens as VR 200 to 600 f5.6 to 6.3 G, which I thought that was interesting. I guess it puts VR in there because the lens is stabilized. That is not what you will see when you have this connected to a Sony camera, but it's pretty close. Love the results though. Look how nice and sharp that is. Of course, I'm only 10 or 11 feet away, so it is pretty easy to get great results like this, but I was still impressed that this adapter was doing it. Here's another female red-bellied woodpecker shot with very similar settings, 400 millimeters, 1/1250th and f7.1. This one I liked enough to share on social media. And here's another shot of that beautiful female red-bellied woodpecker, still 400 millimeters in f7.1, and still happy with the results from this lens on the Nikon camera, a Sony lens on a Nikon camera with this Viltrox adapter. And it's working. And here's the last shot that I shared with you from the back porch. It's a male house finch there on my stump perch, 1/1250th of a second, f7.1, and 400 millimeters. I couldn't believe how well this adapter was working. I came down here to the Chickamauga Dam where I'm hanging out with Gautam. He's shooting with the Z52 and the 180-600, and I'm shooting with this crazy Frankenstein Sony 200-600 with the Z8 and the Viltrox E Z Adapter. There's a bunch of gulls flying around, and believe it or not, this adapter is working well enough to shoot birds in flight with the Z8 and the Sony lens. I was really not expecting that to be the case, but let me show you some pictures of what I got here. I had my Z8 set to 12 frames per second, as I often do. I usually don't go all the way to 20 frames per second, and this is a 142 shot burst as I followed this gull around there in the tailwaters of the Chickamauga Dam. Even got to catch it as it dove down to attempt to catch a minnow there in the water, and as you can see, this combination did pretty good. So here's a few examples of what this combination can do with birds in flight. There wasn't much light, so this is 1/1000th of a second, ISO 4500. I'm wide open at 6.3 and 600 millimeters, and this shot is heavily cropped, but it still looks pretty darn good. And here is another example, 1/1000th and 4500 ISO, wide open at 6.3. and 600 millimeters of the ring-billed gull there flying over the turbulent waters of the Tennessee River and the tailwaters of the Chickamauga Dam. And now there's a little more light now, so I'm up to 1/1600th of a second, and my ISO is all the way down to 220. It's another 600 millimeter shot wide open at 6.3, and the lens is just getting the birds in focus, even adapted with the Viltrox on the Nikon camera. Just crazy. My last experiment was using this Sigma 18-50 lens on the Z52, which these are not compatible at all until you put in the middle of those two the Viltrox E Z Adapter. Well, let's see how this adapter does for video. I'm using the Nikon Z52 right now with the Viltrox E Z Adapter, and the lens I have on here is a Sigma 18-50 f2.8 lens. It's an APS-C lens designed for Sony E mount cameras, and let's see how well it keeps me in focus as I move back and forth through the frame. You know, the Z52 itself with native glass is not noted for being really good at this test. So if it does well at all with an adapted lens for a different mount, that will be pretty impressive to me. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Overall, I was pretty impressed with the performance of the Viltrox E Z Adapter, and I'm excited about the opportunity to possibly add some Sony lenses to my collection. You know, there are some Sony lenses and even third-party Sigma lenses that are only for Sony that you can't get for Nikon. And like there's a 14 millimeter f1.4, which would be a great astro lens. You just can't get a lens like that for the Nikon system. But they do make it, Sigma does, for Sony, and I believe this adapter performs plenty well enough to use that lens on my Nikon cameras. Thanks for watching this quick review of the Viltrox E Z Adapter for Nikon cameras and Sony lenses. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, reach down, hit the thumbs up button. If you want to see some more stuff like this, subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye-bye.